So are you people able to download the videos?
Yes, sir.
As in,
Yes, sir.
huh? Okay, good. So can you see the slides, all of you?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. So we were looking at the distribution of nuclides, and we have seen that whenever you have even number of protons or even number of neutrons, the nucleus is unusually stable, or at least if one of them is even, either the number of neutrons or the number of protons, in that case also it's relatively stable and with having roughly sub-equal number of nuclides. But in case you have odd atomic number and odd neutron number, then the nuclei is unstable, so you have only very few nuclides. Now the reason for this, as I was explaining in the last class, is because uh, just as you have electrons, residing in different shells around the nucleus, so having shells having specific quantized energy levels, so in a similar way, neutrons and protons also reside in shells in the nucleus. And since neutrons and protons are, fermions, so they have half spin. So of course, pairing of the spin leads to more stable configuration, and therefore whenever you have pairing of protons and neutrons in the shell, this leads to configurations that are energetically favorable. And that is the reason why whenever you have both Z and N even, you have most stable nuclides, or at least when you have either the atomic number or the neutron number as even, so you have relatively more stable nuclides. Now in some cases, whenever you have the proton or neutron shells are full, so each shell can accommodate a certain number of protons or neutrons, just as way each just in a similar way, in an analogous way as the electrons are organized around the nucleus. So you have S shells with two electrons, and P with D, F, and so on. In a similar way, whenever the proton or neutron shells are full, then those nuclides are unusually stable. So they are supposed to have, they are called magic numbers. Okay, so magic numbers, they occur whenever you have mass numbers of 2, 8, 20, 28, 50, 82, and 126. So magic number refers to the condition when the proton or the neutron shell in the nucleus are full. Okay, that means there are no unpaired protons or neutrons in the shells. Now in those nuclides where both the proton and neutron shells are full, okay, then they are called doubly magic. So when it's either the proton or the neutron shells which are full, they are magic. And whenever both the proton and the neutrons shells are full, they are called doubly magic. So some of the doubly magic nuclei are helium 4, oxygen 16, calcium 40, calcium 48, lead 208, and so on. So these have unusually high stabilities. Now there are some other doubly magic nuclides, but I'm not going to talk about them. They are unstable because of some other reasons. Okay, now so far we have seen a few features of the distribution of nuclides, and we have seen that nuclides are stable. Some nuclides are stable, others are unstable, and generally stable nuclides are those which usually have even number of protons or neutrons, or when you have the proton and neutron shells are completely filled. Now all the stable nuclides are ones which in the nuclide chart they would plot along the central dark region. So this black region that you see here, this region is the region occupied by all the stable nuclides. So by stable we mean a nuclide which does not undergo any sort of radioactive decay. All those nuclides which undergo some form of radioactive decay, they are referred to as unstable or radioactive nuclides. Okay, so as you may be aware, right from your school days, you have been taught that radioactivity is the spontaneous emission. The word spontaneous is very important in the definition because it is not induced, it happens on its own. It's a spontaneous emission of either a particle or an energy by an unstable nuclide. Now, and the reason why these nuclides are unstable is because they have either excess of protons or excess of neutrons. So those nuclides which have excess of protons or excess of neutrons, these are the nuclides which are unstable, and therefore these are the nuclides that undergo radioactive decay. Now if you look at the nuclide chart, you see that this dark region is the region occupied by the stable nuclides, and on both sides of this black or dark region you have some squares which are stippled. Okay, one in light pink or orange color and the other in light blue color. Now these are the nuclides which in one case, so if you go to the left of these nuclides here, these ones, these if you look, these are nuclides which are deficient in protons, or they are too many neutrons, or they have the high neutron to proton ratios, and that is the reason why they are unstable. And on the other hand, if you look at nuclides to the right of this, these are the, so if you look at this nuclide chart here, keep in mind that the this is the proton number and this is the neutron number. You can reverse the proton and neutron numbers while plotting. You make one as a x-axis and the other as a y-axis. It's just that you have to keep track of it. So these nuclides in this case, which plot to the right of the value of beta stability, these are the nuclides. As you can see, they have higher proton by neutron ratios. In other words, they are the proton rich nuclides. Now both these sets, the ones to the right of the value of beta stability and the ones to the left of the value of beta stability, both these regions are occupied by unstable nuclides. So these unstable nuclides surrounding the value of beta stability, they do not like to be unstable. They want to quickly become or convert into a stable nuclide. So they try and move towards the value of beta stability, either this way or in the opposite direction. Okay, so this is the shortest path in which they can move towards the value of beta stability, by moving across along a line with a slope of -1. So all these nuclides, the neutron rich and the proton rich nuclides, they tend to undergo radioactive decay and move towards the value of beta stability. So how can they do it? So there are several ways in which these proton and neutron rich nuclides, they can move towards the value of beta stability. So the first one is referred to as isobaric decay. This is the dominant mechanism by which the majority of nuclides undergo radioactive decay. So some form of an isobaric decay. We call it isobaric decay because whenever a nuclide moves either down along a line with a slope of -1 or moves up with a slope of -1, it follows a trajectory which is shown by this red line here. So this is a trajectory of a line having a slope of -1. And this is the line along which all isobars will plot. You see, nuclides having constant number of neutrons plus number of protons. So in other words, constant mass numbers. So all isobars will plot along these kind of lines. So you can have a different number of lines like this for different isobars. So the reason why we call it isobaric decay is that the daughter isotope that you produce after the radioactive decay is always an isobar of the parent. In other words, it has the same mass number but a different atomic number. And in the isobaric decay, the decay vector, as I have shown by this red line here, the decay vector always has a slope of -1 in the nuclide chart. So there are three types of isobaric decay which is possible. So the first one is beta minus. So most of this thing what I'm talking about is kind of revision. So you should be familiar with it. It's beta minus decay or negatron decay. The second one is beta plus decay or positron decay. And the third one is electron capture. So we will look at each of this decay in a little more detail. So beta minus decay, also called a negatron decay. So this kind of isobaric decay is undergone by neutron-rich nuclides. Okay, so nuclides which are rich in neutrons, or in other words deficient in protons. So in this case, in this figure, so these would be nuclides which all plot to the left of the value of beta stability. These are the neutron-rich nuclides. Now, since these nuclides, they are neutron-rich, so what happens is, so the beta minus or the negatron decay, so they have to somehow reduce the number of neutrons in the nuclei because they are neutron rich and therefore unstable. So what they do is they convert a neutron into a proton and an electron, and in the process you also give out an antineutrino. So neutrinos and antineutrinos, they are fermions, okay, with near zero rest mass and no charge. So very small mass, no charge, and they only interact by the weak nuclear forces, and they are not affected by strong nuclear forces, and that is why they can easily penetrate normal matter that we have. So they can easily pass through matter. So the beta minus or a negatron decay involves the conversion of a neutron into a proton and an electron. So this proton, so this, by this process you decrease the neutron by proton ratio of the nucleus and make it more stable, and the electron that is produced is ejected out as a beta minus particle. Okay, what we call it as a beta particle. So this is how the beta minus or the negatron decay works. So this is how the neutron rich nuclides, they try to move towards the value of beta stability. So if you convert a neutron into a proton, so essentially what you are doing is you are increasing the atomic number by 1 in the daughter and you are decreasing the neutron number by 1. If you, okay, and however the mass number of course will always remain constant. That is why we call it as isobaric decay. So common example that many of you would be familiar with is the decay of 87 rubidium. Okay, so 87 is the mass number and 37 is the atomic number. Decay of 87 rubidium to 87 strontium. So this is a beta minus decay, which forms the basis of the very commonly used rubidium strontium isotopic system that is used in geochronology. So this decay of 87 rubidium into 87 strontium is an beta minus or a negatron decay. There are some other nuclides which undergo beta minus decay, for example, hydrogen 3 or tritium, beryllium 10, carbon 14, 36 chlorine, iron 60, and so on. But for us, I think this one is one of the most important ones that we will use later on. Okay. Any questions so far? Anybody? Okay, if no questions, we move ahead. So now the second kind of isobaric decay is beta plus decay or a positron decay. Now this decay is undergone by the proton-rich nuclides. So if you remember the nuclide chart, so we are looking at these nuclides here, these blue stippled ones here, which lie to the proton-rich side, or in this case to the right-hand side of the stable nuclides, or the value of beta stability. So these proton-rich nuclides, so they have to reduce the number of protons in their nuclei to become stable, and therefore they do the opposite of what happens in the beta minus decay. So what they do is they convert a proton into a neutron, and in the process they give out a beta plus or a positron and a neutrino. Okay, so this process involves the transformation of a nuclear proton into a neutron, and in the process you give out a, because you have to maintain the charge, you have to give out a beta plus or a positron. So that is why it's called the positron decay. So here again what happens is, if you convert a proton to a neutron, you reduce the atomic number by 1, you increase the neutron number by 1, and therefore your mass number remains constant. So that is the reason why we call it isobaric, because you see the parent and the daughter, they have the same mass number, but they have different atomic numbers, so they are isobars of each other. So example is the decay of fluorine. Fluorine 18 decays to oxygen 18 plus a positron. Okay, there are some other nuclides which undergo beta plus or positron decays: 22 sodium, 26 aluminium, 41 calcium, 53 manganese. So you try and remember some of these. So this is how a beta plus decay or a positron decay works. Now the third one is called a process of electron capture. So technically speaking, it's not a decay, but it has the same effect. It produces the same effect as that of a decay. So it's called an electron capture. So this is an alternate mechanism by which what happens is the nucleus, it captures an electron from outside the nucleus. So you know that around the, so if you have the nucleus, if this is the nucleus, and if you have your electrons moving around in shells, different electrons, so what happens is the nucleus is able to capture one of these electrons, inner shell electrons. Okay, now so you can think of it, if you have a nucleus, it captures an extra nuclear electron. So what may happen is this electron combines with the proton to produce a neutron. So it's a reaction where you have a proton in the nucleus, you get an electron, so you produce a neutron. So the effect in this case is similar to that of a positron decay or a beta plus decay. So the electron capture process, you can visualize it as a reaction between an extra nuclear electron and the proton in the nucleus to form a neutron and a neutrino. Okay, so plus a neutrino here. So here again you will see that if you convert a proton into a neutron, you decrease the atomic number by 1, you increase the neutron number by 1, but you maintain the mass number, and that is the reason why the electron capture process is also an isobaric mechanism by which a nucleus can become more stable. So since the net effect is that you reduce the atomic number by 1 and increase the neutron number by 1, so you will have the same trajectory as a positron decay. So an example would include decay of beryllium. Okay, beryllium 7 capturing an electron and getting converted to lithium 7. Okay, so this is an example of a nuclide that undergoes electron capture process. So these are the three important ways in which either a proton-rich or a neutron-rich nuclide, which lie outside the value of beta stability in the nuclide chart, they can lose their protons or neutrons and move towards the value of beta stability. As soon as an unstable nuclide, which is either proton or neutron rich, as soon as it is able to undergo one or several such isobaric decays, it will move closer and closer towards the value of beta stability till at some point of time you produce a stable nuclide within the value of beta stability, and that is where the decay chain would stop or end. Okay, so in other words, what that means is, so if you go back here, okay, so if you go back here, so if you start with say an unstable nuclide here, for example, and you undergo a decay, you undergo a decay like this, you move, you produce another unstable nuclide, and then you have another positron decay, and then you make a stable nuclide here. So that is where, so this particular decay chain will stop. So if you look at the neutron rich nuclides, so example, you start here, okay, you undergo a beta minus decay, you produce another stable unstable isobar, then you produce another decay, then you reach the value of beta stability and you produce a stable isobar. So this chain will stop here. So this is how these isobaric decay pathways, they help a nucleus to attain.
Sir, you were unaudible for the last 30 seconds.
What?
Sir, your voice was not coming here for the last 30 seconds. Can you repeat, please?
The last one, all of you, or it's only you?
No, sir, it's not audible.
It's not audible.
Yes,
Sir, right now it's audible. For the last 30 seconds, it was not.
In this slide?
Yes,
Can you
sir.
see the slide?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So as I said, that whenever you have either neutron rich nuclides, okay, or proton rich nuclides, so they will continue to undergo either beta minus decay to produce the next unstable nuclide, another beta minus decay, till you reach the value of beta stability where you encounter a stable nuclide. So that is when the decay chain gets terminated. In a similar way, if you have a proton rich nuclide, it undergoes a positron decay, produces another unstable nuclide, undergoes another positron decay till you reach the value of beta stability. So this is where this particular chain will get terminated. So this is the way in which either both proton or neutron rich nuclides, they may undergo a series of beta minus or a series of positron decays to move towards the value of beta stability. Okay?
So,
yeah.
So which type of nuclide perform electron capture? Is proton rich or neutron rich?
It will be the proton rich, yeah?
Proton rich. Okay.
Because proton rich nuclides will have a greater tendency to be able to capture a electron. So that is why the electron capture process will proceed similar to the positron decay, the pathway. Okay, is it clear?
Sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Sir, what will be the direction of the path of the radioactive decay, whether it will be beta plus or beta minus?
Yeah, beta plus or beta minus. So you have to see beta minus is undergone by neutron rich nuclides, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
here, so they will move down like this. Okay, they will move down along a line with a slope of -1. And the proton rich nuclides, they will move up along a line with a slope of -1, the reverse direction. The slope will be the same, but the directions would be different. Have you understood?
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, in beta plus decay, how a proton could be transformed into neutron? As we all know, neutron has a greater mass. So how it's energetically favorable?
Yeah, it is. In the nucleus, densities are so high that it is possible. You cannot do it outside. In fact, a neutron is not even stable outside the nucleus. You know, it decays in 15 minutes to a proton. You understand?
Okay, okay, sir.
So outside the nucleus, a neutron is unstable. Okay, it decays in about, its half-life of about 15 minutes. It decays to proton plus a positron.
But sir, how um, energy is balanced in this reaction? Energy in terms or mass, as we
Yeah,
all.
you give out energy. That is what I have not written the energy parts in the equations here.
Okay, okay,
Ah,
okay,
because we are not interested in the energy. That the physicists are interested.
okay.
We are interested in the nuclide because we want to use it for some dating of rocks or dating of minerals. This energy is lost, right? We don't see this energy, or you cannot measure. I mean, it's measured if you can measure the decay. But for us geologists, if you want to date a very old rock, this energy is gone from the mineral, right?
Okay,
So
sir.
of course there is energy involved in this conversion.
Okay, sir. I understood.
Yeah. So any other question? Please ask questions. Don't be afraid, or don't think what my friends will think if it's not a good question. I have still lots of questions. I've been teaching this course for 10, 12 years now. Okay. Now, there are some nuclides which undergo both a beta minus decay as well as a beta plus or a positron decay. And those nuclides which undergo both, modes of isobaric decay, beta minus and beta plus, they are said to undergo a branched decay. Now, the reason why an unstable nuclide can undergo branch decay is because adjacent isobars. So what do you mean by adjacent isobars? So this is, so I've just drawn a small part of the nuclide chart where you have the Z atomic number and the neutron number here. Say you have a stable isobar here, and you have a stable isobar here, and you have an unstable isobar here. So these three are all isobars. If you look at it, they all lie along a line with a slope of -1. That means constant Z by N. So adjacent isobars, if you see, they have different atomic numbers, right? And different number of neutrons. And therefore, the nuclei will have different masses and different binding energies. So two adjacent isobars have different masses and different binding energies of the nuclei. So theoretically, there is always a possibility that there can be a spontaneous reaction where nuclei with the lower binding energy per nucleon may undergo decay to a nuclei with a higher binding energy per nucleon. That means more stable nuclei. So because of this difference in binding energies of the nuclei, so it is possible that adjacent isobars normally need not be stable or cannot be stable because they have different masses and different binding energies, and therefore a spontaneous reaction can take place between the two, or a decay reaction can take place between the two. So this was formulated by a Japanese chemist called Mattauch, and that is why this is called the Mattauch's isobar rule. Mattauch's isobar rule states that adjacent isobars cannot be stable because they have different masses and binding energies. So you can have a spontaneous reaction between the two. What this implies is that two stable isobars, okay, must be separated by a radioactive isobar, which may undergo branch decay either through a positron or beta minus decay or through a beta plus decay. Now, two isobars can both be stable only if their atomic numbers differ by more than 1. Okay. So if you have two adjacent, say if you have this is one isobar, this is the other isobar. So their atomic number, the difference in atomic number is only 1. So these two will not be stable. So this one and this one can be both stable. They are both isobars. Why? Because their atomic numbers differs by more than 1. So the difference in binding energy of the nuclei is too much that it is unlikely that this nuclei or this nuclei can decay into each other. So only when their atomic numbers differ by more than 1 can you have two isobars which are simultaneously stable. So what this would mean is that if the atomic numbers of the isobars differ by less than 1, then it is possible that you have a decay either in the form of a beta minus decay or an electron capture between these two isobars. So an unstable isobar therefore can be bounded by two stable isobars, and you can have a decay where a small proportion or a proportion of this unstable isobar decays through beta minus decay to this stable isobar, and the rest of it undergoes a positron decay to produce this stable isobar. So those nuclides which undergo both a beta minus or a beta plus or a positron decay simultaneously, these are nuclides which are said to undergo branched decay. So a very common example which we are quite familiar with in earth sciences is the decay of potassium 40. Potassium 40 undergoes a branch decay. Some of it decays to argon 40, okay, and the rest of it decays to calcium 40. So the decay to argon 40 involves emission of a positron, so it's a positron decay, and the decay to calcium 40 is a beta minus decay. And this decay of potassium 40 to argon 40, if you remember, this forms the basis of the potassium argon system of dating, which is commonly used in geology for dating minerals, for young rocks, for dating emplacement ages of igneous rocks, or for dating the timing of metamorphism. So all these minerals which take in substantial amounts of potassium in their structure, for example phyllosilicate minerals, even hornblends, etc., amphiboles, they can be dated using this radioactive system. So here you have to keep in mind the potassium argon system involves a branch decay where part of it decays to argon 40 and the other decays to calcium 40. So this is an example of a nuclide undergoing branch decay. Okay, have you any question on this?
Sir,
Yeah.
Sir, in the diagram which you had shown, which was neutron versus proton, we could see that one element could go in one direction only to reach the stable side. But how come here that it can go through two ways? Like if it is on the right side of that stable line, it can only have beta plus or beta minus. How can it have both of them simultaneously?
Which one?
Sir, if we consider 40K19 here, and can you go to the graph which were shown on the first day, sir, neutron versus proton?
Uh,
Sir,
yeah.
sir, in not this graph, sir.
Which one?
Sir, you passed it actually. It was on the fourth slide. Yes, sir, this one.
Yeah.
In this one, sir, how can they can go through both sides? That it has to be present only on one side of the stable line.
No, but this is because you see, these are only this one is showing only the very low atomic number part of the nuclide chart, huh? Where you have very few stable nuclides. If you go towards higher atomic numbers, what you can see is that, say for example, okay, I will give you, this may not be happening, but just to show you, say you have a cobalt 58 here. Okay, can you see that, all of you?
Yes, sir.
Cobalt 58 here. Now this is an unstable nuclide. On this side, on the proton rich side, you have nickel 58. On the neutron rich side, you have iron 58. You understand? So this may undergo a decay like this, or it may undergo a decay like this. So don't think that the value of beta stability is just one nuclide, just one ray of nuclides. There are several nuclides which are stable like this here for a single atomic number. So you can have these kind of, I'm not saying that in case of cobalt or nickel you have a branch decay. What I'm saying is nuclides which occur in this kind of situation here, where you have an unstable nuclide and then you have two stable nuclides on either side, the proton rich side and the neutron rich side. They can undergo branch decay. Not all these nuclides. For example, chromium 53 here. You see, it can undergo a decay this side, here, or it can undergo decay this side. So, or say for example, chromium 54, it can undergo a decay like this and then decay like this, or it can undergo a decay like that. So it's possible. It depends on what the adjacent nuclides are and what is the configuration of the stable and the unstable nuclides in that particular region of interest, atomic number and neutron number that we are looking at. Have you understood? So here you only seeing, because I'm only showing the very low atomic number parts. So 1, 2, 3, 4. In this part of the nuclide chart, you only have very few stable nuclides. But when you go to higher and higher atomic numbers, so then you can have you can have much more complex configuration of the stable and unstable nuclide. In those cases, you can have an unstable nuclide between two stable nuclides, and there you can have a branch decay. It's not that all nuclides undergo branch decay. Yeah? It's only few. And when you have this kind of situation, then you can have a branch decay.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir, on what factor it depends that it will be a positron or negatron decay? I mean, is there any factor?
Yeah, it depends on the neutron by proton ratio.
So if it is higher, then it can go under the branch.
What?
Sir, I mean, if the Z by N number is greater than 1.5, then I mean, so surely we can tell that it will go under the branch and decay, or it will be
no, not branched. You said positron, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Positron decay, if it is proton rich, then it will have a positron decay. Whether it will undergo a branch decay or not, that will depend on the configuration of the nuclides that you have in that region.
Okay.
Have you understood?
Yes, sir.
Any other question?
Sir, for branch decay, the amount of both daughters will be same.
No, it's not same. It's different.
Sir, but why both are the unstable nuclide is
It
spontaneously?
It depends on the differences in the binding energy. How much is the binding
Okay.
energy difference of the two stable isomers? Okay, so depending on all these factors, because ultimately the objective is to produce a stable nuclide, right?
Yes, sir.
So so it is not say 50-50 that half of it will decay to this and half of it to that. Different branch decay, different isotopes will have different proportions. So that of course I don't know whether you can predict it, but it has definitely been measured or counted for many isotopes. Okay, so
Okay, sir.
yeah, any other question? Otherwise, I stop here today. Yeah.
Sir, both beta positive decay and electron capture decay, these all are applicable for proton-rich element.
Proton-rich nuclides.
Yes, proton-rich nuclide. So how do you determine in which case it is undergo electron capture or undergo beta positive decay?
How come you determine? I do not know, to be honest. You try to read it up. Which one will undergo beta plus decay or which one will undergo electron capture? I don't know. Maybe I can read it up and answer you next time.
Okay, sir.
Sir?
Yeah.
Sir, there is only potassium argon system which has